Hey everyone, Walter Crosby with Helix Sales Development, your host of Sales and Cigars. Today is our episode with Matt Anderson and the series that we call How to Think About Marketing. And today's episode is long, so I'm going to cut it in half, and I'm going to encourage you to listen to the first half and then take that break and then get back on the treadmill tomorrow and listen to the second half. All really important stuff. We talk about the three things that your marketing needs to do, right, to get that attention of that ideal customer, and to persuade them that you have something that they need. It solves a problem, that it solves a fear, it changes the way they think, and then a call to action. So that's the premise that we're talking about, and we dive into this. The psychological profile that I built in the previous episode, and then how we use that information to write an ad, how to tell a story, how to keep that hook, tell the story, agitate it, right? I mean, these are the pieces that we talk about, and it's really coming together as to what you need to do differently with your marketing. So if you're listening to your people, you need a new website, or we need to run different kinds of ads. You might need to run different kinds of ads, but is the messaging solving a problem? And we get to that towards the middle of the second half of this interview. So go grab a cocktail, go grab a cigar, strap in for another illuminating episode on marketing with my buddy Matt Anderson. So Matt, welcome back to Sales and Cigars in our next installment of How to Think About Marketing.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Walter. These conversations have been fun.
Well, fun, and I think illuminating for me, for the audience. I've had some comments from some of the folks that they're starting to understand what marketing is really supposed to do, and they realize that they haven't really got it right. They haven't got it figured out. So yeah. I think there's some folks tuning in to try to take some next steps. So
that's great. That doesn't surprise me. I've had a lot of clients through the years, small companies to $100 million plus companies that really at the end of the day haven't really figured out their message yet, are struggling when it comes to getting leads and making sales.
It's funny, $100 million companies, everybody thinks they have it figured out, but there's so many elements that they've got that they're not necessarily gotten right. They've got some things right, otherwise they wouldn't have got there.
Right.
But there's some components of, onboarding people, right? Getting that right, to the marketing message to be dialed in to turn them into a $200 million company.
Right. Or they had a message that worked in one market and now they're in a different market, and, they forgot all the lessons they learned along the way that made them successful in the first place.
And maybe there wasn't even lessons. Maybe they just hit it.
Yeah.
Right. By accident. And then they had to duplicate it. You didn't have that process to get there. So, you get, then you rely on luck and trial and error. And
yeah, I mean, I can think of one client in particular that they learned the wrong lesson when they got lucky initially. And so they're, received wisdom about how marketing worked and why their marketing was working was a little bit wrong. And when things started breaking, it led them down a path of trying all the wrong things to make it work again.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to see.
Yeah, interesting. And if you're at the helm, a little scary.
Yeah, totally.
So let's talk a little bit about, we were discussing psychological profile, why that's important, understanding that persona, that profile of our customer. Let's kind of start there and then go to that reverse engineering concept.
Yeah. So how did we get here? How do we get to this episode? we talked initially about how marketing is first and foremost about getting your message right. Most marketers focus on how you communicate your message. Is it going to be through Google Ads or Facebook, or are you going to go to a trade show, and then what's the creative concept that is going to make a really compelling image, or let's update your logo, right? There's a whole bunch of that's how stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But what really powers your marketing first and foremost is what your message is, not exactly how you communicate it. If you have a strong message, it's like having a really good joke, right? It's funny whoever tells it. But if your message is weak, right? If it's not really connecting, it's sort of like one of those jokes that you had to be there for it to be funny, right?
Right.
Everything needs to line up in just the right, precise way in order to engage the customer. And so we talked about, the core of your message is, who are you talking to, and why would they want what you sell? What are you trying to sell? How does it work? All of those things. What is the offer? And we said that in order to begin to build that message, the place to really start is by building a psychological profile of your ideal customer. When you know who your ideal customer is, what problems keep them up at night, what fears are driving them, what desires they have, what do they want, what do they need, what do they imagine achieving if your product works for them. And then their belief system, what they believe about the types of products you offer, what they believe about themselves, the objections they typically have, the false beliefs that hold them prisoner and keep them from solving their problems that maybe
Yeah, those
create
are big.
for them.
Those are big.
Until you know that stuff, you're not going to really know whether whatever message you come up with is going to be on target. So we talked about the components of that psychological profile. We gave you homework for how to research the voice of the customer to really find out what your customer really thinks and feels. And so last episode, we kind of walked through the homework that you did, and we built out one of those psychological profiles. And I don't know about you, but I always find it surprising the kind of insights that come out from just exploring, some of those questions.
It's. I think we've talked about this before, but like as a business owner, we think we know certain things, and we don't. We have very strong beliefs, and we make decisions based on those beliefs. And if you take a step back and go do that research and look at what they're actually saying, you're able to see that your interpretation is just a little bit off. And even 15, 20, 30 degrees off is, a couple of degrees off on an airplane, you're going to end up in the wrong spot. You're going to go in a really different direction. So, and I did that recently with an event I was doing where, my customer is a CEO or business owner, right? And they looking to hire salespeople is one of the things that we solve. And I was inviting them to show up to this, sales hiring intensive for 5 days in a row for an hour. And I was solving a huge problem that they had. They all said that's a big problem. But, when I did the research, there's no freaking way we're going to show up for 5 days in a row for an hour.
Right.
However, if you invite my team and the people that are responsible for the hiring, I'll sponsor that and get them to show up, and I'll even pay you to do that.
Totally.
So, I mean, to me, that's, of the research, it got me thinking about a completely different problem. And, they value their time. They, in a very important way. And if I'm offering something that's a solve, but they're not going to invest that time. They'd rather invest a few $100s. Easy peasy, right? They're done. And I'm like, I think the same way, right? There's a guy painting our kitchen right now. I could do it, but it would take me twice as long and it would look half as good, right? And my time, it would be a waste. So it's really getting out of the way is what my big takeaways were from this, and doing the research, getting out of the way and really listening to somebody. That's the big difference.
I mean, when it comes to marketing, we often talk about this in terms of the dreaded curse of knowledge. right? We all know a whole lot more about what we do professionally than our customers do. So like if I was a surgeon and I wanted to, talk to someone, my natural thing might be, well, my ideal customer has a torn patellar tendon, right? And that makes perfect sense to me as a surgeon, right? I might even think that I'm dumbing it down because, there's probably a whole lot more I could describe about it. But when it comes to marketing, I might need to say, is your shoulder hurting? Does it hurt to, when you reach behind your seat in your car?
Can you put your belt on without it shooting paint all over the place?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where, doing that research that we talked about is really helpful because at the end of the day, when you're in marketing and sales, you need to learn to speak how your customer speaks. You need to use the words they use, the concepts they use, in order for what you say to resonate with them. It's like having this key, this magic key that unlocks all doors, right? When you have the right phrases for the right customers, it makes everything else in your marketing and marketing and sales efforts easier. It kind of opens that door to engagement. So
And I think that's the it's a great analogy. Like if you get that right, you get the words right, you have the right context, you're speaking to them where they are about the things that they care about, the way they talk about it. You do have that key, that pass key that gets you in wherever you need to go. That's what real marketing is: opening those doors and allowing the people to be like, yeah, he's saying what. That's the way I think. That's my concern. I need to talk to him, right? That's what you're doing. It's like just opening that door, and then somebody's got to go, you know, qualify and do the sales part of it.
yep,
But it's if good marketing is going to open that door, it's going to give you that pass key. Whatever the how is,
yes,
doesn't matter. Once you have those words right and that messaging there, you can run ads, you can make phone
yeah.
calls, you can send emails, you can print pictures, you can put balloons up in the air with stuff on it. It
Yeah, you can put
doesn't
it on a
matter.
billboard. You can tow it behind a plane. You can, put it in a Google ad. You can, put it in the yellow pages. When you have that right message, you'll start to, attract the attention of your ideal customers. So what we promised to do last time in this episode was now that we've built out a psychological profile, we wanted to talk about, well, what do you do then, right? You have the psychological profile, but how do you actually use it to build your message? And so, what I thought we could talk about this time is to, kind of walk through the process of using that psychological profile to reverse engineer the messages that you need to incorporate in your marketing and your sales efforts as kind of a starting point for building that message that attracts the right customers, persuades them to buy, and calls them to action.
Okay, that's that was the promise we made, and that I think is going to sort of open up some eyes. Um, and it's sort of the secret sauce.
Yeah, I think so. And the thing is, like each step of this process, none of those steps is very hard, right? It's pretty easy to go out and do some research. It's pretty easy to answer some simple questions about your customers' problems, the symptoms of those problems, how they feel about it, right? And then when you look at those answers, it's just one small leap until you start to be able to spin out a number of different messages. And in order to help organize that work, I like to think in terms of the three things that marketing needs to do in order to be successful. Your marketing, if it's going to be successful, your message needs to do three things. It needs to attract the attention of your ideal customers, right? If you can't attract their attention, there's no way you're going to be able to persuade them, right? You don't get
Right.
an opportunity to say anything else unless you can get them to listen to the first line. But then once you have their attention, you need to reward that attention, right? You need to provide some value to them. And ultimately, the way you provide value needs to persuade them to want what you're selling, right? So if
Yep.
you can't persuade your customers, if you can't change their mind and influence their behavior, your marketing is not going to work. But even once you've persuaded people to buy, you still need to call them to action, and you need to be able to make an offer that is irresistible, right? An offer that clearly provides value to them, that helps overcome objections, and all of those things. Now we're probably going to save the discussion of the offer for another episode because that's there's a whole bunch of complexities around there that we probably don't have time for today. But what I'd really like to do is focus on, well, how do you get from that psychological profile to attracting attention, and then how do you use the psychological profile to figure out some of the things that you need to say in order to persuade your customers to buy.
We
So
might not even be able to get through those two, but I think
maybe
that
not.
we'll,
We'll
so
do our best.
so let's start with then getting into the conversation, getting in front of them, getting them to pay attention. Right,
Yeah.
that's the piece.
Yeah, exactly. One kind of quotation that I always keep in mind here, the great David Ogilvy, who is kind of the model for Don Draper of Bad Men. He
Hmm.
was great copywriter in the 1950s and 60s, founded Ogilvy and Mathers, still one of the top 10 ad agencies in the world. But he said, once you've written your headline, you've spent 80 cents of your advertising dollar.
Hmm.
Right. The easiest way to think about how marketing grabs attention is usually with a headline. It's either at the top of an ad, or it's at the top of the brochure, or it's the first line of an ad that you see. It's this hook. It's the way that you grab attention. Those first words out of your mouth. So we need a good hook if our marketing is going to work. And in order to do that, we usually need a good headline. So if we wanted to come up with a good headline for you, let's look at the psychological profile you built. What are a couple of problems or pains that your customers have?
I'm going to look at my notes so that
Sure.
I can go back to my research. Um, one of their problems is their inability to forecast, their fear that they bank on this a number that they're going to get to in a quarter,
Yeah.
and they're making decisions based on a forecast that is wildly inaccurate.
Great.
So they discount things like that, and that gets them into trouble.
Yeah. So we might call that inconsistent sales performance, right? And I think we kind of built out a description of that. Your sales team's performance is like a roller coaster ride. It has unpredictable highs and lows. 1 month they're hitting targets, and the next they struggle to close deals. The constant uncertainty leaves you feeling anxious, unsure if your team will meet their quotas, and you yearn for stability and consistent results. Right? I
I
think
like that. Yeah.
that's just something I jotted down as we were talking last time. So, how do we take that and turn it into things that grab the attention of your audience? Well, the first way that we can grab attention of an audience is with an ad, right? And so an ad, say on Facebook or LinkedIn, needs a headline that will capture attention. So let's try to come up with some headlines based on that. For example, one way to do that is to ask a question. Are your sales projections unreliable? Question mark. Or tired of unreliable sales forecasts? Does your sales team miss their quota? The sales team missing their quota? Question mark. Right? Those questions in a headline will almost certainly, if you have that problem, get you to pay attention to whatever that next line is. Right?
Right.
You almost can't help yourself. You're curious. What are they going to say next? Another way to do it, you might be advertising a free brochure, right, or an ebook or a PDF that 7 ways to ensure your sales team hits their quota next month,
Hmm.
right? If that's a problem that you have, that's going to grab your attention, right? And
Yeah.
you're almost certainly going to be interested in, well, what are those 7 ways? I can think of 3 of them. What are the other 4? Right?
Hmm.
You can make a bold declaration. Here's the single biggest reason your sales team is missing their quota each quarter, right? Well,
Hmm.
that's going to create curiosity. What is the biggest reason? I can think of 3 or 4, but is it something unexpected?
Yep.
Um, the one thing you need to do to make sure your sales team hits their quota, we can keep spinning out ideas, right? Those are all possible headlines that can then bridge into an ad, right? They're possible headlines that could be downloadable lead magnets, right? It could be a checklist. It could be a how-to guide. It could be, 7 reasons. It could be a blog post. Those are all ways to begin to engage your customer before you've ever begun to ask for a sale, right?
Yep.
So, at the very first instance, the first thing that your customers see needs to be able to grab their attention. But when it comes to grabbing their attention, a good headline isn't enough, right? Because you want to start building a relationship with the customer. You want to start winning their attention long term. How do you do that? Well, one way to do that is with what I call an empathy story, right? Which
And
is
empathy.
an empathy story.
Okay.
So you might begin by saying, I understand what it's like you, when I was a sales manager, I was always frustrated. My sales team's performance felt like a roller coaster ride, with unpredictable highs and lows. 1 month they'd hit targets, and the next they'd struggle to close deals, right? So you're saying you're reflecting back to them how they're thinking and feeling in the language they're using. And when you reflect back to them in a simple story, I understand what it's like. I was there too. Then you're showing that you really understand. You're beginning to build a relationship with them with empathy for how they're thinking and feeling.
Okay.
Right? If you were a person with that problem and you read those lines, hopefully your reaction is, he gets it. He knows exactly what it's like. Right?
They have that thought. They may not articulate it, but they're like, now they lean into this message, this ad, this picture, this billboard, whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Often physically, like if you're in person in a sales encounter and you begin to recite an empathy story, you will almost always see people shift and literally lean in. They can't help it. Right. And you'll start to see people nod in their heads. So even if they don't like verbalize, yeah, this person gets exactly what it's like, that gut feeling will secure their attention for what comes next.
Okay.
Right? I mean, like, if you were to read something like that and say, "Oh yeah, they get it," can you help reading the next line?
No, you're in. You have to do it because you're curious,
Yep.
because you think there might be something here. So that next thing has to deliver.
Yeah, totally. So another way to deliver after that is with what you might call a goal projection story, right? So, one way to do that is to start with the words, "I believe you deserve," right? So, I believe you deserve, a sales team that comes to work every day motivated and excited to talk to their list of prospects. You know, Sales ought to be the easiest part of the business. If you're selling what people want, sales ought to be effortless. It shouldn't be a source of endless frustration. And I'm just spinning ideas up off the top of my head, right?
No,
But
no. That's something that's going to resonate with somebody who thinks they have a great product,
yes,
thinks they have a great service, think they deliver it well,
yep.
right? That's going to resonate. They're going to lean in even farther.
Yeah, and so you can see what we're doing here, right? We're taking elements of that psychological profile we developed. We know our prospects believe in what they produce. They think they have a great product. They're frustrated that it's not selling. They think the problem is their sales team, but maybe the real problem is that they're talking to the wrong people. They don't have the right message. They're not getting attention in the right ways, right? So those are all ingredients that you can then say that then are almost like it's almost like a Mad Libs or a connect the dots. These are a whole bunch of dots. What message connects those dots? Well, a couple of the stories that we just described, right? Okay, we need a
Mhm.
headline. How to get what you want without things that frustrate you, right? That's a surefire headline formula that you will see. And then, how do you pay off that attention? Well, you show you understand what they're thinking and feeling. And then you tell them that you have the thing that will get them what they deserve. right? All of those things will begin to anchor the attention and start to win the goodwill of your customer, right? And if your marketing does that, chances are, even if the first ad doesn't sell them, right? Because the first ad rarely does. Maybe the sixth or seventh, they'll be still be paying attention when the sixth or seventh ad rolls around, and finally rebuts all the objections they have and convinces them to pick up the phone and book the appointment.
Or push the button or go do the
Yeah,
thing.
exactly, exactly. So but if you think about what your marketing needs to do, if your marketing isn't working, if you're not getting the leads you want, if people aren't clicking the button, if they're not paying attention to your ads, if you're not getting a bunch of leads, chances are your marketing isn't grabbing the attention of your audience. And the number one reason your marketing isn't grabbing the attention of your audience is that it's not resonating with your ideal customer's problems, and it's not resonating with what they want. So, the very first thing you need to do is you need to start working on your headlines, and then you need to work on how your marketing pays off those headlines.
Hey, thanks for being part of the Sales and Cigar community. I wanted to share that I wrote a book, The 7 Critical Mistakes CEOs Make with Their Sales Organization. The CEOs who've read it tell me I cut to the chase quickly, get to the point, explain exactly what they're experiencing, why they're experiencing it, and how to fix it. So if you want a free copy, go check out the link in the show notes. Now let's get back to the interview. That headline has to tie back to the profile that's been
Yes.
created. And to do that, you really have to have the profile. You got to understand what those beliefs are, those misinformed beliefs, those
Yeah.
fears, those frustrations, those concerns, and then that's what drives the headline. And then you have to be able to help them see that you get it,
Yes.
right? Because there's a that connection of understanding from one human to the next.
Right.
Um, and the next piece is you making sure that you're getting them to know that you believe that they deserve it, or that there's a
Well,
that's yeah, that's the part where I'm kind of like,
yeah, yeah. So there's a number of different copywriting formulas, right? That for how you bridge from the headline into your selling story. One of them, a very common one you might have heard of, is problem, agitate, solution,
yep,
right? So, the headline might state the problem, right? But in order to really build momentum to prepare someone to buy, you need to really anchor into that problem. So, one way to do that is what I described as an empathy story, right? To reflect back to them how they feel and to show that you understand. Another way to do it is, the PAS formula calls it agitate. That's to really agitate, describe the problem in emotional language and agitate it by making them really feel the stress and the pain that surrounds that problem.
poking the bear, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. So, for example, for you, when you might agitate the problem by saying something like, when your sales team's projections aren't reliable, you never know how much revenue you're going to bring in this month or next month or this quarter or next quarter. It makes business planning impossible. And, when you can't count on projections, the day will come when the sales you need to make payroll won't be there,
Yeah,
right? Or
you
it'll always struggle to meet payroll.
yeah, payroll was what popped into my mind. Is like it's sort of like this. You're amping up the concern,
Yeah.
agitating that. Um,
Yeah. When you need to invest to create that new product, you won't have the confidence to know the sales will be there to fund it. Uh, you know, the end of the month will always be stressful. And you'll be hounded by calls from your payables because you have to keep pushing your vital vendors out,
yep.
and even your wife and your loved ones will begin to wonder whether you'll be good, whether you'll be true to your word, right? And or you'll carry that stress home for you, and your little child will look up at you, wondering, "Daddy, what's wrong?" You know,
Yeah.
there's just and we're
Pain.
this isn't actual copy, right? But it's to illustrate how you can keep spinning ideas out from these insights in your psychological profile. But what all of those things do is it calls to mind for your customer the problem they have, and it should start to connect with them emotionally to make them feel what it feels like in the middle of the problem when it's as bad as it gets, right? Because if people aren't really feeling the importance of a problem,
They're not going to
there's
do anything.
not the emotional momentum that they need to want to resolve it, right? Because like if you're going to make them fill out a lead form or book an appointment, they're going to have to decide to do that instead of do any of the other 100 things on their to-do list right now,
Yep.
right? And in order for them to decide to do that, it has to be the next most important thing for them to do. Well, your marketing needs to remind them why it's important, and the hooks that you have to remind them why it's important are the things that we told you to create that psychological profile from, right? Problems, pains, or fears, desires, needs, or wants, and common beliefs, things that already occupy their attention.
Yep.
Those are the only three hooks that you have to gain someone's attention and to move them emotionally so that they're prepared to listen to your selling story.
It's almost like it's sort of it's really emotional. It's agitation, but you're performing like this open heart surgery
Yes.
on the prospect,
Yes.
and you're taking out their heart, and you hold it up in front of them. It's like, look, this valve right here,
Yeah.
it's leaking,
Right.
and this is the problem. And if we replace that valve with this bovine valve over here and put it in there, and then it will solve the problem. It'll stop leaking. Everything will be grand and blah, blah, blah. Right.
Yes.
It's really what, that's the solve. But you're literally sitting there holding their heart, right, in their
Yes.
hand.
Yes.
Like, put it back, put it back. I mean, that's where you want to go. I mean, it's sort of a
Right.
graphic example, but if we don't get them to be emotionally involved, give them those compelling reasons, right, that
Yes.
are going to motivate them to do something, and we don't get their attention, then we never get them to fill out the form. We never get them to pick up the phone or push the button.
Yeah, exactly. The mistake I see a lot of my clients making before they start working with me is they get it in the wrong order, right? They start explaining why their product is so great, and they give a list of their features and benefits. Their websites almost always do this, right? Here's a big promise headline, and then here's the features and benefits that differentiate my product from my competitors.
Nobody cares.
Exactly. But what they've forgotten to do is they've forgotten to tell the prospect why they ought to pay attention in the first place, right? They haven't built a connection with them yet. They haven't shown that they understand their problem. They haven't explained why they have their problem. And they haven't, shown that they have a solution, right? Until you get their attention, they're not going to listen for all the different technical sales points.
No. And it's an exact parallel for following the sales process that I teach. That's a methodology that they follow to move around. Like, even if you start that process after you've done all this marketing, right now they're with you on a call. I mean, you have to get their attention. You got to get them emotionally involved. And those are the steps that we go through to kind of just bring them back in each one of those steps.
Yeah.
that we follow. It's the same thing. You're duplicating it in a different context.
Right. Right. Yeah. This
The last thing you want to do in that discovery process is to start talking about your product or service.
Totally.
And it's exactly what we're talking about with marketing. And my process is around a baseball diamond, right? To get the first, the second, the third,
Yep.
right? And then you go home to score. Well, most salespeople, and what we're saying is that most business owners or marketing folks will go from first to third by running across the pitching mound, and you've skipped all of these steps, and nobody's really going to pay attention to you. Don't really have the information you need. You haven't made the connection. You haven't built the relationship. So you're stuck there on third base, and you never get home.
Yeah, the stuff we're
Plus,
talking
it's
about,
illegal.
yeah, it's fractal, right? If you've heard of the geometry shape of fractal, like a snowflake, right?
Yep.
Its little edges mirror its shape in the large, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing with marketing and sales, right? Every ad needs a hook, it needs a selling story, and it needs an offer, right? You need to grab their attention, you need to persuade them that they ought to take the next action, and then you need to give them a way to take the next action, right?
And some of that's visual, some of it's words, right? If
Totally.
you get, I mean, Apple did it visually, right?
Yep.
That first big commercial that they did that they weren't supposed to do, or Steve wasn't supposed to authorize to do.
Yeah.
Um, there was a lot of visual there, not a lot of words, if I'm not
Totally.
mistaken. That's when you're really good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's when you're really good and you have multi-million-dollar budgets to
Yeah.
spend on a Super Bowl ad.
Well,
Um,
I think that's part of the. I think we can kind of maybe that's great English, Walter. I think we can kind of take it there, and people can start to think about what stop thinking about the product, but what does the product solve? How does it
yeah,
emotionally connect with their buyers, with their prospects? What's the problem that we solve? What's the way that they think about that problem, right? I'm going backwards, right? The
yeah,
research that's done, um, and one of the things I think that you said that it really should people should pay attention to is that they're skipping the steps, and they create a great little headline, maybe, or a pretty good headline, and then they just start pitching,
right.
even with their marketing, and that's just like
Yeah. So,
awful.
so for example, I had a client last year that was a software startup. They had raised millions of dollars from VC firms. They built a legitimately world-changing product. They have a really good story to tell, and they had struggled to make sales, and their pipeline was, they said they had prospects, but when you looked at the quality of the prospects in there, virtually none of them were ideal customers. Um, and they had a sales team that was making calls every day. They had a firm making cold calls for them, and nothing seemed to work. We sat down and in 6 weeks just changed the words on their homepage. Same website design, same logo, same everything. Changed the story a little bit, right? Because what we discovered was their homepage was like what I described. It had a headline and then it talked about their features and benefits. And we started to describe the problem because most of their ideal prospects thought they were doing a good job. They didn't realize they were doing a bad job. They didn't know what inefficient processes were costing them, even though it was, in many of their ideal customers' cases, more than $10 million a year. They didn't know a product like our customers even exist, or like my clients even existed. So we described the problem. We described why it was important. We showed why they had that problem, and then we told them how they needed to solve it. And then we introduced the solution on the homepage. And just making those changes tripled their sales pipeline. It more than doubled their lead quality. It got them in the several multi-million dollar deals that closed, and created a pipeline of 7 and 8 figure deals that that continues to go today. And it did it all just by changing the words on the website, not spending more money on advertising, not radically changing their selling process, not none of that. We just had to get the right message in the hands of the salespeople, and they were able to do the rest.
Well, the website is just a brochure that doesn't if it doesn't say the right thing, people can just toss it, right?
Right.
as opposed to tossing out a brochure. They just click away and they're gone. You got to get them to lean in. You got to get them to make that emotional connection, and then you can start to build a relationship. And maybe they don't do something in that moment, but then they see it again, and it comes back like, that is my problem. They
Yeah.
said that before. And I got that problem. Like, holy crap, I should really think about this. And then, right? So
Yes.
there's all that noise out there. So if we make it harder for them to figure it out, it's never going to work. So,
Yeah, no, exactly. And the other thing too is that these principles will help you not just on individual tactics like a single ad, right, which needs a hook, a story, and an offer, or a web page that people see after they click an ad, which also needs a hook and story and an offer. But a big picture, it also is a guide to strategically what you need to do and how sales and marketing need to work together, right? So if you know that marketing needs to grab the attention of your ideal customers, it's likely the case that you're going to need some ads whose sole purpose is to get attention, right? And you're going to need some ads that once you got the attention and you're remarketing to your customers, persuade them, to want what you buy or help overcome objections, or use those common beliefs uh, to introduce a new idea about what the solution needs to be.
and that's the complexity of the strategy,
Yes.
right? But because those are tactics, but to make the strategy work, you have to have those tactics that are consistent with the strategy, that's
Right.
consistently telling the same story, and that your message doesn't change.
Right. Right. And so like in your world, when you're a sales manager, and you ought to know the messages that people are likely to have seen from marketing, right? And you can use the same customer profile we talked about to then say, well, okay, what do my salespeople need to say on the first call? Well, I know they need to grab attention, and I know they need to qualify the prospect. Well, how do we do that? Well, we know that a qualified prospect typically has these three problems, and a qualified prospect typically wants these five things. Well, if I can create a series of an opening line that shows that this conversation is probably going to be worthwhile, and a series of questions that qualifies whether they have these problems and desire these outcomes, I can determine pretty quickly whether someone is likely to be a good customer for me or not, right?
And they can determine if you have a reason, if they have a reason to keep talking to you.
Exactly.
um, and that's where some sales techniques come into play, and we can position ourselves with somebody. It's like, yes, both of those problems you mentioned are problems that that we need to be solved. Can you help me solve them? And the technique that we use is, not sure yet, I need to ask
Yeah,
you a couple of questions, right? Because we need to
exactly.
agitate that. But from the sales perspective, we really need to figure out, is this a big enough problem
Yeah.
for them to do something different? Status quo is always a big competitor.
Yes.
But I mean, I was talking to a guy that he's like, yeah, this is a problem. Yeah, it's costing me money. Like, what kind of money? It's costing me $50,000 a month. Wow. Okay. Is that a lot of money? It is, but I have another problem that's costing me $500,000
Yeah.
every quarter.
Yeah.
Like, oh shit. So that's trumps the $50,000 a month problem. So we can't make any assumptions either, right?
Yeah.
You got to
Exactly.
really dig into that. So I think that's that congruency, right? Where you said sales and marketing need to work together. I mean, they do.
Yeah.
We need to be telling the story, and we might change the the tactic a little bit. We might differentiate at a different point. We might deliver it in a different way. But if they got there because of something they saw or something they heard, you better be able to say the same thing in a different way and tap that same emotion and be
Right.
consistent. Otherwise, your sales is going to fail, even if you got the marketing right.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And then, you might then use that psychological profile to say, well, okay, what does the presentation need to include in the next meeting? right? Well, I know that the customer wants this outcome, but they have this objection, like you mentioned last time. Your customers typically object to sales training because they've spent tens of thousands of dollars on sales trainers in the past, and it hasn't made a lick of difference in their sales, right? And so you might have to say, well, look here, most people think that sales training is the solution to the problem, but the problem with sales training is that it gives people a bunch of generic pitches, but it doesn't really teach them how to engage the customer. I'm just making stuff up here.
Yeah,
So
but I
what you
mean,
need to do instead is XYZ. Here's how
yeah,
to do that.
exactly. Well, my philosophy is sales training is the thing you do last.
Yeah,
There's so many other challenges we got to get right, and you got to get the right people. There's no sense in wasting money on training if you're not clear about where the strengths and weaknesses are.
right.
If you're not really clear about what your objective is, sometimes it's just about making people feel good for a couple of minutes, and then you're back to ground zero. So,
Yeah, I mean,
um,
so like for example, then if you were creating a message from that psychological profile, knowing those things, right, you might say that, the problem with sales training is that uh, you spend, tens of thousands of dollars training the wrong people. So before you do anything else, you need to make sure that your sales people are actually good salespeople. A good salesperson will be able to take virtually any message and generate sales. As long as you have a good product, if you have a good salesperson, you're going to get sales. Maybe not as many as you could, but you're going to get things moving in the right direction.
they're going to
So
overcome.
yeah. So what we do is we work with our clients to use the special trail sale, and I know you've got this tool, this sales qualification system that is 95% accurate in determining whether you have the personality traits to be an effective salesperson for a particular industry and a particular kind of sale, right?
No,
And so
you need to understand your sales team
right.
before you do anything.
Yeah,
And
and so you can then say, well, for just instead of spending tens of thousands of dollars on sales training, spend a few $1,000s to make sure you've got the right salespeople.
know if
Here's
they're
how you
worth
can do that.
investing. Yeah, I love it. This, I mean, we've got practical information that people can go contemplate and think about. And I think we've started to turn some dials for business owners and CEOs, and I think the smart ones are going to go and start to experiment, do some research, try to understand what that profile looks like of their people. What do they care about? What are their beliefs? What are their concerns? What do they believe that is wrong?
Right,
With their fears. If they can really, if they can do that, and then they can start to think about that story, that hook that they can get somebody to lean in, and then they can start to think about how that becomes, make those emotions more compelling and make them
yeah,
feel that a little bit more agitated, and then talk about what the promised land looks like.
right,
um, the last thing we do is talk about product. Even with marketing, it's the last thing we do.
exactly.
So, what should people think about right now to be prepared for that? I don't know, that next stage here, where we talk about an offer, we talk about, like, what do they need to do here? Really develop that piece.
Yeah,
They should call you to start to figure this out, but
right.
is there something that they can be doing that would help them? Let's say, I'm going to call Matt, but I need to work some of this out. I want to be prepared. I want to make this go faster.
Yeah, sure thing. So, I can't give you specific steps about like we did last time about, well, here's how you do the research to figure out your customer's problems, right? Or here are the three things that need to go into your customer profile. But what I can, because once you understand your customer, like we've talked about, your customer is going to begin to tell you exactly what you need to say, and you'll start to say, well, I need a story that's kind of like this, that addresses their pain point this way. and I need to promise them this in order to maintain their interest. And I need an offer that overcomes objections in this way, right? So I can't tell you, write this story exactly this way. What we were able to do today, though, is give you a bunch of examples, right?
Mhm.
Well, start with a headline. And then you can reward their attention with an empathy story or with you deserve story, right? That reflects back what they want. But what I can have you do, which I think would be really helpful if you're not getting all the leads that you want, if you're not making all the sales you want, you can use the three-part structure we talked about to kind of audit your current sales and marketing efforts. And what I want you to do is I want you to ask, how are we grabbing the attention of our ideal customers? Right? And the answer to that is going to be partly like mechanical. Well, we run Facebook ads, and those Facebook ads say these things. We run
Mhm.
Google ads. They're targeting these keywords, and they say these things. We have billboards, and we're in the yellow pages, and we're doing that. But I also want you to think about the content of what those ads are saying. What are those messages? So, what are the headlines that people see? And do you think those are actually grabbing the attention of the right person? Right? Sometimes you have a really compelling headline, but it grabs the attention of the wrong person.
Yes.
So, like, I had a law firm client at one time that had, their initial client engagement was more than $100,000. And the way they were trying to get leads was with a brochure that they described as free advice on how to, fix whatever business problem they fixed, right? Well, someone looking for free advice isn't going to be an ideal prospect for $100,000 white shoe law firm.
They won't value it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, it attracted attention, but it attracted the attention of the wrong person. Right? So ask yourself, how are we grabbing attention? And then look at those messages and decide, is it actually attracting the attention of the right person? And are you rewarding that attention by agitating their pains? Do you think it resonates with the language the customer is using? All of those things. Okay. But then also ask of each asset, right? So you say, okay, well, we've got these ads in a sense it sends people to this webpage. Well, okay, then you go to the webpage and you say, well, is that web page signaling at the very top that it is related to the ad that the person clicked on? Right? You'll be shocked how often the landing page for an ad bears no relationship to the ad itself. And I'll tell you, every time that the landing page isn't related to the ad, it does nothing. You have a virtually 100% bounce rate. Right?
Yeah,
People
you
see the
just
page
switch.
and they go,
Yeah, there's no congruence.
right. It's not congruent at all. But then, okay, you say, okay, my ads send people to this web page. Well, then I also need to evaluate that web page in light of the second goal of my marketing. It does that persuade people to buy? Does it agitate their problem? Does it introduce a solution? Does it explain how the solution works? Does it provide proof? Does it overcome objections? Is this persuasive? Does it reward attention, or is it something that, starts to begin to feel irrelevant? Like, I'm giving a bunch of details that people aren't prepared for yet, in the way that we described the client that I talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And then finally, do we call people to action? You would be shocked how often a client comes to me and I start to do that analysis, and I discovered that they never give the customer an opportunity to buy. They don't have a buy now button, right? They don't have a go here to buy, right? They just expect the customer to figure it out. And I've had cases where we just put a buy now button in, and quintuples their sales overnight, just
Because we made
because
it
they were
because we
missing
made it
that
easy.
element of their marketing.
So, I mean, take these ideas and go back and look at what you're doing and seeing where the holes might be,
Yeah,
where the missing pieces might be, and start to think about that. So and that'll get you prepared for the next episode. The other way to do that is to call Matt and have him help you with that audit, that
yeah,
evaluation, because your tool, your process will get them there faster, and the
Yeah,
ROI
I
will
kind
be
of
much.
built a career out of fixing marketing problems that internal marketing teams and other ad agencies can't.
Yeah.
Um, you know, my typical client is someone who's spent tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars on marketing, and they're not quite sure what to do next because nothing really works reliably. And so I've built a process that allows us to quickly zero in on what the problems are. Usually, we end up having to fix the message first, and often that's all it takes. Like the client we talked about here, you get the right message on the homepage, and sometimes that generates all the sales that you need. But if that's not enough, we often can quickly spin up ads that you know uh, start to work pretty quickly, and start generating the leads that you need, and fill your sales pipeline, and ultimately get you the sales that you deserve. And so, if you do the homework that we've described, if you start to build that customer profile, and you do that analysis of the marketing we just talked about, well, you'll be in a better place to work with someone like me. Or you can just call me and not do the homework, and start getting the answers even faster.
Absolutely. All right, let's land it there until next month. Um, I again, man, I appreciate the insights, the audience. I think we're building some tension there, which is what we want to do, right? We need that
Yeah.
to help them see that there's a way to fix this.
Yes.
It's just looking at it from a different perspective,
Yeah.
and
Like
it's
I told
not.
you, I was hoping that in these conversations, and I think we're getting there, that we can arm your listeners with the knowledge that I wish my clients had before they called me. Right. That you know, if you understand marketing in the way we're talking about it here, you're going to be so much better equipped to get good marketing out of the marketers who are on your team, or out of the marketing agency that you hire, or out of a consultant like me that you engage. That one of the biggest problems in marketing is that clients don't know enough about marketing to prepare their marketers with the information they need to be successful. So, if
Yeah,
nothing else, I hope that you come away from these episodes understanding marketing a little bit better.
and without having to dive into some big books and some depth, we're just we're laying it out for them to have a different conversation. And that's really the other outcome that can come out of this is that they go back to their team or to their people, and it's like, hey, we're doing this wrong, and here's what I need to think about. And sometimes that's enough to get the people to think about it properly, to use their creative skill sets in the right way. They just need the frameworks. But and that's one of the things that you do. You give them that structure and like, go execute this, and your ad should have these elements to it, and then your redirect should have these elements to it. But it's got to be consistent. So when they go back to your landing page or your home page, it's like it's not a whole different message, and now I'm confused. Do you do A or
Yeah.
do B? So
Yeah.
I love it.
It's funny. You would think that marketers are trained to think the way we've talked about here, but they often key off of what they hear from the client. So when the client comes and says, I think we need to redo our website, it's like, well, okay, I think we need to redo our website. And they've been trained how to make it look pretty, but they haven't been trained what your customers need to hear in order to buy.
Right.
Right.
And
And so
that's a big thing. You cannot assume that web person or that whoever is going to give you the right words. They might give you something that is SEO friendly. They might give you something that's
yeah.
pretty, um, but it's really those messages that are going to carry the day. So, dude, thank you.
Yeah.
I
It's my
appreciate
pleasure.
it, and we will reconvene next month. Thank
Looking
you.
forward to it.
All right, man. See ya.
Okay.
Hey, thank you for being part of the Sales and Cigars community. I want to take a quick second to share that I'm doing a free sales hiring challenge this month. I'm going to give you everything you need to hire sales superstars and avoid the sales duds. Check out the link in the show notes to be able to sign up for free.